and compare it with the development of our mental categories to interpret the world than our ways of thinking. And this process has been considerably accelerated during the last 100 years through the rise of party bureaucracies. It can be shown that no other human ability has suffered to such an extent by the progress of the modern age. The relentless process of more and more, bigger and bigger, all of which were supposed to serve the political needs of modern mass societies in order to make representative government possible where direct democracy would not do. We do not know where these developments will lead us, but we can see how cracks in the power structure of all but the small countries are opening and widening. That every decrease of power is an open invitation to violence. And I assure you, for your own well-being, it's very unpleasant to live under a dictatorship or a tyranny or a one-party dictatorship, but it is paradise compared to living under a totalitarian dictatorship.
Excellencies, distinguished scholars, policymakers, civil society pioneers, dear friends. We gather today in the magnificent Egmont Palace not simply to launch another initiative, but to breathe life into a space of appearance, that luminous arena Hannah Arendt described, where distinct yet equal actors meet and where politics in its noblest sense begins. She reminded us that, and I quote, plurality is specifically the condition, not only the conditio sine qua non, but the conditio per quam, of all political life. Plurality does not merely make politics possible, it actively constitutes it. Yet the landscape we inhabit is increasingly flattened into unforgiving binaries. Winners versus losers, patriots versus traitors, the people versus the elite. These binaries suffocate the oxygen democracy requires, the mutual recognition of difference, and they stifle the emergence of something new. Our task today is therefore radical in its simplicity, to refill the public realm with many voices and to prove by our collective deeds that plurality is not a weakness, but the deepest source of democratic resilience. That conviction animates the Hannah Arendt Network on Democratic Resilience and Renewal. Our manifesto pledges to, and I quote, celebrate the diversity of voices, perspectives, and experiences within our network, understanding that a vibrant democracy thrives on the richness of its collective discourse, end quote. We are therefore determined to repluralize democratic debate and to resist every form of anti-pluralism and autocratization. Lofty aspirations, however, mean little less unless they become shared work. We therefore embrace the strategy of collective impact. It binds us to a common agenda that keeps our eyes on the same true north. It insists on shared measurement so that factuality, not ideology, guides our choices. It invites mutually reinforcing actions that allow each partner to play to their strengths. It demands continuous communication to nurture trust across difference. And it provides the backbone support that holds our collaboration together without stifling initiative. Seen through Arendt's eyes, collective impact is embedded plurality. a choreography in which many dancers keep their individual steps while moving to a common rhythm. Why insist on plurality now? Because binarity corrodes judgment. It tempts us to pick sides before we have understood the question. Arendt warned that the banality of evil sprouts from, and I quote, an inability to think from the standpoint of somebody else. Binary thinking leads precisely to this paralysis of imagination. Plurality forces us to take into account perspectives that we have not created ourselves, thereby stimulating the judgment on which every democracy depends. That is why I turn first to the scholars among us. Your research gives us the clarity to distinguish resilience from rhetoric, illuminate the mechanics of polarization, but also surface the practices of hope. I turn to the policymakers. You hold the levers that can embed and institutionalize plurality, deliberative assemblies, open source lawmaking, participatory budgeting, so that the space between individuals becomes the true territory of democracy. And I turn to the civil society builders. You are democracy's early warning system and its laboratory of renewal. Each citizens panel, each media literacy workshop, each town hall dialogue makes pluralism tangible in daily life. None of us can fortify democracy alone, yet together, through disciplined plurality, we can transform scattered effort into a Europe-wide surge of democratic energy. Our program today mirrors that ambition, from analysis of radicalization to demonstrations of digital tools for citizen participation. Every session reminds us that resilience is forged when theory meets practice and when skepticism meets imagination. So let us embark with 3 shared commitments. First, think with courage. Examine uncomfortable truths, yet resist the refuge of camps. Second, act with others. Treat disagreement not as a danger, but as raw material of democracy. Third, measure what matters. Let us track how policies we propose, the partnerships we forge, and the public attitudes we influence shift because we worked together. Hannah Arendt warned that if we are to save democracy from ourselves, we have to omit what has become superfluous, to draw a line between what is real and what is mere appearance. The superfluous today is the false comfort of binarity. The real is the vibrant, sometimes dissonant music of many voices seeking a common future. Friends, let us choose the real. Let us leave this palace not as representatives of isolated sectors, ideologies, or nations, but as co-authors of a plural Europe ready to renew its democratic promise. Thank you, and let the conversation begin.
So again, let me reiterate a warm welcome, even somewhat delayed. So I will limit myself to a few words on behalf of the Egmont Institute. Well, by the way, we are not the owner of the palace. We have much more modest office next door. I mean, this is not our daily place where we work. So the Egmont is the Royal Institute for International Relations. It was created more than 70 years ago in the immediate aftermath of World War II. I'm in charge of the European Affairs Program. You might wonder why the European Affairs Program is venturing into something which looks largely as a domestic national issue, because the democratic challenge is also very present at EU level. We see it every day through the way the European institutions are working or not, and also through evolutions within the EU member states, which reverberate on the EU agenda for sure. So this is absolutely essential for us to be present on that topic also. And we have developed some activities. We'll follow up with other activities afterwards. But I can say a word about that later today. We are running against time this morning because indeed of the technical delay at the entrance of this room. Simply a quick word. I mean, we are not completely escaping the kind of binary approach of the world that you were hinting at, because we have a morning session dedicated to academic and scientific presentation, an afternoon session dedicated to practitioners. So we are still a little bit in this kind of binary world when we were putting the program together. We're extremely happy to have the opportunity of this partnership with the Hannah Arendt Network and Christophe in particular. We hope that it's only the first step, certainly. We hope to keep on working with you, and we might again say a word about that this afternoon. But I don't want to delay further the beginning of our work, your work this morning, and I will immediately pass the floor to Olivia Garaldo, who is sitting next to me, and who is going to be the moderator of the morning session. Olivia, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. It is an honor for me to be here. I am the Hannah Arendt director of the director of the Hannah Arendt Center for Political Studies at the University of Verona. And we are very much happy to be here today for the launch of this Hannah Arendt Network. I won't say anything further, just to leave space for our first keynotes in the morning, but I just want to say that for us, even if we are academics at work at the university, it has been one of our primary engagements to be a center that works not only within academia, but makes as its core goal to interact with civil society and to sort of disseminate what we produce in academia with civil society and start a dialogue with the civil society. And this is why we so much welcomed the idea of the Hannah Arendt Network on Democratic Resilience and Renewal. So the morning session will be divided in two parts because in the middle we have a coffee break, but essentially from a content point of view, the first part will be dedicated, if I am not mistaken, to the issue of radicalization of the political from two different perspectives, but both our keynotes will tackle the issue of how in European democracies radicalization and the rise of the far right have been problems that European democracies have to deal with. So let me introduce the first guest, Susanne Munschenk. Susanne Munschenk, as you can see from the program, is Director of EU Intelligence, and EU Intelligence is a specialist service for news and analysis of the EU and Eurozone and its interaction with the rest of the world. Susanne is interested in economic and political narratives, and I think that in her presentation, in her keynote, she will give interesting insights on the difference between facts and narratives, which I find particularly interesting. And Susanne has a PhD in economics from the University of Bonn, and she also studied at Open University and has a diploma on development and emergency practice from Oxford Brookes University. And before starting Eurointelligence, she was a researcher at the Center of European Integration Studies in Bonn and worked for the Association pour l'Union monétaire européenne in Paris. And she is, I believe, German, but she now lives in Oxford. So I will give the floor to Susanne, and the title of her presentation, as you can see, is Radicalization of Politics in European Democracies.
Thank you, Olivia, for this kind introduction. I'm here not with my academic hat today, but I'm here as an observer of politics in Europe, throughout Europe. And my focus is here on the European far-right parties. And one of the observations is that when you go through all these national European countries, they are coming in all forms of different shapes and flavors. They are defined by the context in which they have been formed, or how they interact with power, and what positions they are defending. There are some things that they have in common. They all find that the voters that are dissatisfied with what classic politics has to offer, they all promise their electorate to take back some form of control, and they all are defenders of a cultural identity against its enemies. So over the past 25 years, we saw a persistent rise of the far right across European countries. I counted amongst those who were represented in national parliaments, 11 far-right parties that were founded well before the turn of the century. This includes the FPÖ in Austria, the Front National or Rassemblement National, as they call it today in France. Some were founded after the fall of the Iron Curtain, such as Fidesz in Hungary or the Croatia Party of the Rights. Here in Belgium, Vlaams Belang or Vlaams Blok goes back to 1991. But an even bigger surge of the far-right parties happened in the past 25 years. A stunning 28 new parties emerged in the first 2 decades in the century, including Fratelli d'Italia in Italy or Vox in Spain. In Poland, the Law and Justice Party, the PIS party, kicked off in 2000, and a decade later, 2 further far-right parties followed in Poland. The migration crisis in 2015 was a turning point for the far right in Europe, with many new far-right parties making it into parliament. Internal disagreements between hardcore and moderates also led to splits in these parties. In the past 5 years alone, 10 new far-right parties emerged. Many of them are split-offs from the existing far-right parties, either because the mother party was turning more hard-right, or they're not radical enough, or they were not ready to compromise with other far-right parties. This was the case for the Estonian nationalists and conservatives, the Democrats and Denmark Democrats, Power Belongs to the People in Finland, or Identité and Liberté in France. Popularity of the leaders before entering politics can help in election campaigns. 2 singers founded the Homeland movement in Croatia, or There Are No Such People in Bulgaria. These parties resonated emotionally with the people. They had a great success in the elections, but they not all managed the transition to power. The main electoral contest is now between the center-right and the far-right parties in several EU countries, no longer on the left and right. Last weekend's elections in Poland, Romania, and Portugal was a reminder. In Romania, a liberal outsider, George Simeon, from the far-right AOR party, was running in the election, was won against him. On the campaign trail, Simeon had reached out on Viktor Orban, calling for a new Eastern European pact, and that would have to become an even more troublemaker inside the EU. In Portugal, it was the center-right Democratic Alliance and the far-right Chega that won seats, and the socialists, they lost 20 seats. In Poland presidential elections, the verdict is still out. It's Karol Nawrocki from the Law and Justice Party runs against Rafał Trzaskowski from the Donald Tusk Civic Coalition. The right and the far right together, they achieved 50% of the votes in these elections in Poland. The 2 candidates now have to cater for an appeal to the electorate of 2 far-right parties in order to win the elections on June 1st. In Germany, the biggest sign that the electorate moved further to the right is not the fact that the Alternative für Deutschland, or AfD, came first in the federal elections in Eastern Germany. It is that they're now the 2nd largest party in Western Germany. They're well ahead also from the Social Democrats. In Austria, too, there is a move further to the right. The FPÖ won the elections last year with Herbert Kickl's Fortress Austria program that Austria's president himself deemed as too radical. The president first gave the mandate first to the conservatives, who tried and failed to build a coalition with the Social Democrats and the Liberals. Eventually he had to give the mandate back to Kickl, who then tried and failed to negotiate a coalition with the conservatives. Eventually the conservatives and the Social Democrats and the Liberals mastered or scratched out a coalition agreement, but only because the risk of the failure of new elections was simply too big. What are the mistakes other parties are making? One of them is copying far-right policies to attract their voters. Center-right parties may be tempted to go back and adopt some of their hardline positions, but the experience we've seen is that it means losing more voters to the far-right. We saw this in France in 2023 when Gabriel Attal's government introduced an immigration bill using Marine Le Pen's proposal of a preferential treatment of French over migrants in the welfare system. This element was later struck down by the Constitutional Council. A year later, though, Marine Le Pen's party surged and won the European elections as well as the popular vote in the legislative elections. Or more recently, in Germany, where Friedrich Merz introduced his immigration bill, which was backed by the AfD in the Bundestag. The CDU subsequently underperformed in the elections. The lessons from adopting strategies is that they tend to weaken the center. It is also worth remembering that the far-right parties in these are no longer fringe, and the big mainstream parties no longer represent majorities in European democracies. This changes the gravitational forces. The second mistake was to keeping insisting on firewalls. These firewalls, they work until they stop working. Belgium and France and Germany have firewalls, or cordons sanitaires as they call it here. Sweden had one until 2010s. The firewall may have prevented a landslide victory back then, but it did not stop people from voting for them. It even helped them to radicalize and mobilize further. The longest ever cordon sanitaire exists here in Belgium. It's the place, and since 1991, not only at a political level, but also firewall on the media and trade union membership. Vlaams Belang, though, still exists. It nearly won the elections in Flanders last year, and it is now part of a ruling majority in three Flemish municipalities. At the national level, though, or in Wallonia, the cordon sanitaire still holds. In Germany, the AfD could not be stopped winning votes with the firewall. On the contrary, the AfD won elections in Eastern Germany with 30%, well ahead of the CDU. And they were in second place in some of the Western Germany. In France, the firewall has been a little bit more strategic due to the two-round election system. The Rassemblement National won the popular vote in the second round of last year's legislative elections, but only a third of the seats. This was due to an agreement between the centrists and the left alliance to pool their votes. We also saw that too much attention can be counterproductive. Guy Verhofstadt's government in 2000 made the mistake to take the elections of Vlaams Belang as a measure of the government's success. Vlaams Belang never had a better score than back then. Or Emmanuel Macron, who early on focused on Marine Le Pen as a potential opponent in the presidential elections. This way, Macron gave her prominence she might not have achieved on her own. The lessons from firewalls is that far-right parties can radicalize and mobilize in the presence of political firewalls. A counterexample is Italy, where no such firewall is in place. Giorgia Meloni still won the elections, but she moderated once in government. The far-right has the choice for two paths to power. They can moderate or they can radicalize. Some far-right parties moderated to get into parliament. This was the case for the Rassemblement National in France, who spent nearly a decade to purge itself of the radical members and supporters. And so did the Sweden Democrats since 2005. Moderation can be confined to the local municipalities. Vlaams Belang, for example, renounced its party's ideology to be able to govern in the community of Itzegem. But moderation is not key to success. The AfD did not moderate to win more votes, on the contrary. Neither did Herbert Kickl from the FPÖ in Austria or the True Finns under Jussi Halla-aho in Finland. There are others who moderate once in government. Far-right parties in power tend to behave differently from when they are in opposition. Once in government, far-right parties reduce their demands, focus on key points only, and compromise on the rest. In Italy, Giorgia Meloni turned from a Mussolini admirer to a moderate conservative, skillfully combining a hyper-conservative cultural values with mainstream foreign policy. She has been supporting Ukraine, building pragmatic relations with the US and the EU, and seeking her own role in all this. Is this due to her talent or due to circumstances? Would she do the same if there had been more far-right leaders in government? It's really hard to tell at this point, but shortly after the European elections, a new group emerged further to the right of her ECR group, the Patriots of Europe, with Viktor Orban, Matteo Salvini, and Marine Le Pen's party. So being moderate pays out less for Meloni now than before. We also have seen moderation in the Netherlands. Geert Wilders' PVV won the elections in 2023 and was keen to negotiate a coalition government, but forming a coalition in the Netherlands is never an easy affair. It's a long, complicated process and demands compromises, and Wilders was no exception. He let go of his right to be prime minister, sending forth a technocrat instead. He also let go of some of the more radical program points to form his coalition with center-right parties. But being in office can lose them votes. Geert Wilders had to find this out with lower polling rates. This is also true for the truth in Finland. What makes the far right attractive? It is no longer purely economics. So the time when Bill Clinton's most successful slogan in the 1992 campaign was, "It's the economy, stupid." It has been copied in Europe ever since. But these times are really truly over. Far-right parties prefer more the Brexit playbook under the headline "Take Back Control." Their programs are either socialist or liberal in nature. Some of them are advocating nationalizing strategic industries, others to slash taxes. They care all about cost of livings, of housing costs, about inflation. They can turn against international markets or the euro. It's never just only about economics. There usually is a cultural context. They may tell you that the housing costs are driven up by foreigners or that welfare costs by migrants. Inflation is imported from outside. Far-right parties with a social agenda may look after those left behind. Those with liberal agendas promote the interests of those who dare. Social models of the past also have their comeback. Far-right parties often defend traditional social political orders, be it on race, gender, or sexual hierarchy. They rail against LGBTQ or abortion or the rise of immigrants amidst the decline in local population. Far-right parties choose their policies, calling either for incentives or disincentives. When it comes to immigration, for example, there are different shades of gray. All for Latvia, for example, wants the population of ethnic Latvians to rise to 75% and suggests financial incentives for other ethnicities to leave. The National Alliance in Lithuania, for example, calls for incentives for Lithuanians to return from abroad. Fidesz in Hungary offers tax incentives for Hungarian families with several children. Most other measures, though, are on the defensive side. They're looking at disincentivizing migrants to come to their country. They advocate building fences, increasing border control, closing borders, excluding them from welfare systems, or making it even harder to legalize in the country. Giorgia Meloni negotiated pacts with third countries in order to take over the unwanted migrants. The other thing for what is to be observed is the support from the young. For the strength of the radical party right is an important factor are the young people and first-time voters. Until very recently, young people chose between Green and Liberal parties, but this has dramatically changed. Why? Many hard-right and hard-left parties are social media savvy. Their leaders appeal to the young with their coolness or boldness. There's also gender difference amongst the young. Young women tend to vote more for far-left parties, while young men clearly prefer the far-right. Leaders like André Ventura, Jordan Bardella, Tom van Grieken speak a different language. They are confident, eloquent, with good manners and good looks. They talk about getting things done or cleaning up the house. This sounds rather innocent and less scary than remigration of immigrants. But in essence, they peddle the same message. Most of the far-right parties do not have fully fledged programs of what they want to do once in power. Some parties give immigration a priority and are happy to compromise with the rest. Many of the leaders are excellent speakers, either because they can break down complex issues into simple concepts like Timur Soni to Flins, or because they can mobilize or resonate empathetically with their voter base. In today's debates, they use tricks out of the rhetoric toolbox. They focus on polarizing issues to create a sense of urgency. They rank the suffering so that their targeted voters are the victims they come to defend. And they break reality down into fragments, hoping that no one can connect the dots anymore. With these fragments, facts no longer matter, but narratives do. Leaders of the far-right parties in Europe can turn tables to get where they can score most. Last year was an example. The talented Jordan Bardella lost against Gabriel Attal in a TV debate factually on every point. Yet he still won the debate because he expressed people's frustrations and because his experience of growing up in a multicultural rough suburb weighs more than the mental knowledge that Attal mastered. They also mobilize non-voters. The election of Donald Trump and Brexit are examples of majorities were achieved because non-voters turned up. This was not predicted by the polls. Voters also turned up for Jordan Bardella in France or for Slavy Trivanov in Bulgaria. But this is a two-way street. Far-right parties can mobilize non-voters, but so do their opponents mobilize all voters who want to block the far-right from coming into power. This happened last weekend when an independent candidate, the mayor of Bucharest, won the presidential elections in Romania against George Simion, who was predicted by the poll to win the vote. Far-right parties are the phenomenon in the West. Effect of Brexit takes back control campaign in 2016 had a big impact on the far-right. The first country to exit the EU created new desires of others who wanted to go their own way too. It inspired many far-right parties in Eastern Europe, Poland and Hungary in particular. Another accelerator was Angela Merkel's open border policies. Many far-right parties made it into parliament because of the refugee crisis and Merkel's decision. There were several with sympathy to Russia. Its social conservatism and authoritarianism was widespread amongst far-right parties, at least before the war. There's some enthusiasm now for Donald Trump. Trump and Elon Musk have been actively and selectively supporting and endorsing our right-wing candidates like Giorgia Meloni, Alice Weidel, or Viktor Orban. These prominent foreign policy figures help their popularity at home. A rapprochement between US and Russia and a US economic agenda against China is challenging Europe to position itself. The two wars in Ukraine and Gaza are polarizing the electorate. In these schisms, and with Donald Trump dominating the news cycle, far-right parties may dare to claim to be the new normal in world politics. The exit from the EU or the euro is no longer a priority, but troubles remain. Anti-EU sentiment remains widespread, especially in Eastern Europe. Supranational powers are seen with suspicion. But the EU or the euro matters much less for far-right parties in Western Europe than only a decade ago. After Brexit and the migration crisis against the EU being against the EU became a credible path. But the difficulties in the UK to turn this no vote into something meaningful cooled enthusiasm. Existing from the euro area is no longer on an agenda point, also after they have seen how difficult it is to introduce parallel currencies or how little the electorates seem to mind. Exit plans have been put on the shelf for a distant future. Far-right parties discover that they can create much more havoc by undoing the EU institutions from within. There are now 3 Eurosceptic groups in the European Parliament. They did not win last year's European elections, as many had feared. The next election will be in the same year as Donald Trump's presidency ends, and who knows what world we will be in. One thing is certain, though, we can no longer take for granted that elections will give us another majority between conservatives, social democrats, liberals, and the Greens. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, really, Suzanne, for this extremely in-depth analysis and also disquieting panorama. I just remember, just to give a quick comment on what you were saying in your last part, is that one of the social media memes that was frequent in Italy during the last part of last year when Meloni joined the group of countries that were supporting Ukraine, or joined the group at some point, then she kind of changed her mind, but I'm not sure about that. But it's just that this meme that was going on in social media was the Russian people is not my enemy, the EU is my enemy. So just to give an idea on how dangerous and how complicated the situation is. So let's move on to the next speaker. I just want to mention that we will have a Q&A section at the end of the morning. So I'll give now the floor to Matthijs Rodown. Yes, thank you very much. From the University of Amsterdam, Associate Professor, Department of Political Science, and before that he was Assistant Professor, Department of Sociology at Utrecht University. And he received his PhD from the Amsterdam Institute for Social Science Research. Matthijs is interested in parties, voters, socio-political divides, and public opinions. He studies within an interdisciplinary approach the transformation and the challenges to contemporary liberal democracy. He focuses especially on populism, the far left and the far right, in-group, out-group thinking, political discontent, and polarization. And so the title of Matthijs' talk is The Causes of the Rise of the Far Right. Thank you.
Thank you. I also had a PowerPoint presentation. I just have to click. This one. No. This one. This one. Yeah. Great, thanks. Sorry for that. So my story nicely builds on my predecessor, Suzanne, and I will. There will be overlap, but I will also be sharing different things. Take a look at this graph. It was a graph that was published a couple of months ago by The Economist, and it displays the vote shares of the different party families in Europe, and it is a summary of Europe overall. And take a look in particular at the black line. That's the far right party family. And what you can clearly see here is that the success of these parties has increased tremendously over the years. So these parties were supported by about 5% in the 1990s, the early 2000s. But then a sharp increase started, and these parties are now supported by about 25% of the electorate. So it's a five-fold increase, and by now 1 in every 4 European citizens votes for these parties. So the question is where that success comes from. And one of the explanations that we often hear is that voters have radicalized, that they have become more dissatisfied with, in particular, immigration, but also dissatisfied with the way in which politics is practiced. And to examine if that is true, I did an analysis of, there is the European Social Survey, which is a huge international survey company, not a company, no, that's not right. But they combine all these surveys from different countries and they do analyses. They have lots of questions about immigration and about politics. And I took a look at, wait, let's go back 1 second. They took a look at questions about immigration and about politics. And for instance, they asked their respondents to what extent they thought that immigration was good for their societies or whether it was bad. They asked on a scale from 0 to 10. 0 means bad and 10 means good. And I examined that in all these countries for every separate year. And we have analyses from 2002 until 2020. And these are the results. What you see here on the horizontal line are the years from 2002 until 2020. And on the vertical line, you see the mean immigration score for all these countries for all these years. And you can see that it's a rather flat line, right? So it didn't change that much. Attitudes towards immigrants have not changed much. If anything, people have become more positive about immigration over the years. So if indeed it is attitudes about immigration that explain the rise of the far right, that's not in line with what we see here. In this survey, we also have questions about to what extent people are satisfied with democracy. And they could also answer on a scale from 0 to 10, 0 meaning that they are very dissatisfied, and 10 meaning that they're very satisfied. And this is the result. Again, you see a pretty flat line, no changes over the years whatsoever. So again, this presents us with a puzzle. And the puzzle is basically this. How is it possible that attitudes that remain fairly stable over time explain a tremendous increase in the success of far-right parties? And I will come back to that puzzle, to that question in a minute. But before I continue, I would like to say a bit more about these parties. And Suzanne has already told you about it, but I want to emphasize a couple of things. And there's a bit of repetition, but also a bit of new things, I think. So first of all, these parties are nativist, which means that they all emphasize that the nation is being threatened by what they think are dangerous others, dangerous outgroups. And it differs from party to party what exactly this group is. It can be people who have another religion than it is Islamophobia or anti-Semitism. It can be based on race. Then it's racism. It can be based on other things. It can be anti-immigration attitudes. There are different ways in which this nativism can express itself. These parties are also always authoritarian, which means that they are in favor of a very strictly ordered society in which people who break the law should be punished severely. And of course, they always combine nativism with authoritarianism. So their argument is that the people who break the law are exactly the dangerous outgroups that threaten the nation state. And finally, these parties are always anti-elitist, which means that they are negative about, in particular, political elites. They argue that they are only thinking about themselves and that they are ignoring the wishes of ordinary people. And they also often combine this with the previous two components. Like they say that the elites are responsible for opening the doors to immigrants. And they say that it's exactly the dangerous others who they try to accommodate. So it is something that is, these far-right parties always combine these three elements. I would like to add one more note. In the literature, we often make a distinction between radical right party and extreme right parties. So radical right parties are parties that operate within the framework of democracy. So they are in favor of holding elections and they do not want to use violence. Therefore, we call them radical. These are the parties you probably think of, like Rassemblement National, the Brothers of Italy, and all these other parties you have just mentioned, basically. Extreme right parties do not want to hold elections. They want to demolish democracy, and they are also in favor of using violence. Fascists are an important example. Today, it is sometimes difficult to draw the line, which parties are extreme and which parties are radical. But in essence, I think it is an important distinction that we should try to make, although it's not always that obvious. Many of these parties also do like emphasize other things that are often related to nativism, authoritarianism, and anti-elitism. Populism, which is basically a form of anti-elitism in which the will of the people is strongly emphasized. Euroscepticism, of course, was for a very long time very important for these parties. And today the focus is on what they call wokeness. That is also something relatively new. Then the voters. There are some characteristics that these voters share. It's of course not true that they are always have the same characteristics, but on average, it is possible to say that people with certain characteristics are more likely to vote for these parties. They're more often male. The gender gap is in some countries declining, but there are also signs that it is increasing again. But gender on average still plays a role. Men are more likely to vote for these parties than women. People with a practical education are more likely to vote for them than people with a theoretical education type. People who are less well off are more likely to vote for them. People who are less healthy, people who are more lonely are more likely to vote for them. And people who fear that their status is being threatened are more likely to vote for them. So it's also people that are not the least well off, but people who fear that they might become less well off in terms of economics or in terms of their cultural status. That can also be a thing. There is also a link with certain personality traits. People who score higher on the trait narcissism are more likely to vote for these parties. People who score lower on the trait openness to experience are more likely to vote for these parties, for instance. But finally, what is most important, and I already mentioned it, although attitudes about immigration have not changed and trust in politics has also not really deteriorated in Europe, these attitudes are important predictors for the vote for far-right parties. So it is important to take them into account. So what is it then that happened? How is it possible that these stable attitudes explain voting for the far right? My core argument is basically that there are socio-political developments that have activated pre-existing attitudes and basically made them consequential for their voting behavior. So these developments have basically brought these two actors, the parties and the voters, into each other's arms. So for instance, take someone, or say many people have, who were sympathetic to the ideas of the far right, have for a very long time not voted for these parties. They were still voting for, they were loyal to mainstream parties, or they didn't vote at all. But at some point, this started to shift, and they started to opt for the far right. And I think that there are two important changes in the minds of voters that have led to this change. First of all, the grown importance of far-right issues. So take immigration. I've just said and also shown that attitudes towards immigration have not changed much overall. But the importance that people, how important people think this issue is, has changed. And this is, of course, due to many different developments, like real immigration numbers, like also terrorist attacks, also the discourse of parties, how often media write about and talk about this issue. So in the minds of citizens, this topic has become more important, and it has become more important as a motivation to vote for a certain party or not. And then secondly, there is increased normalization. So not so long ago, these parties were considered beyond the pale. People did not vote for them because they were too extreme for them. That has changed. These parties have slowly but steadily become more accepted by voters. And this, and that is really important, is a self-strengthening process. The more people see them as normal and acceptable parties, the more people will vote for them. The more people will vote for them, the more people will again see them as normal parties, and the more people will again vote for them. So this is a process that strengthens itself. And that is something we have seen over the last few decades. This activation and this basically bringing together the voters and the parties is caused by push and pull factors. And the push factors are basically the conditions that have pushed the voters towards the far-right parties. And there are important long-term developments that have to be taken into account. So individualization is one. There is an electorate that has become available to these parties. Globalization is one. Because of globalization, new issues have become more important. I'm going through these causes in a very rapid speed because I don't have much time. Then the medium-term factors were basically discussed by Suzanne. The behavior of mainstream parties and the fact that they have copied many of their issues and also their ideas. They have not become the far right themselves, but they have moved into that direction, although some have become the far right themselves. What is also important is changing media landscapes. In the media, of course, there is an increasing attention for far-right issues, for far-right parties, but also think of the increased the use of social media. That is something that is that was not there yet 25 years ago. It was really different back then. 35 years ago, it wasn't there. So that has really changed. And then we have short-term events. Think of corruption crises in countries. Think of economic shocks. Think of a pandemic. Think of a war. Think of what is called a refugee crisis. All these events play a role. But then we also have the pull factors. So these push factors create a fertile breeding ground for far-right parties. But of course, these parties also have to act on that. And my argument is that these parties basically did everything right. So they are exceptionally good at telling stories, at telling captivating stories that really move people, that make people interested and participate in politics because it really touches them. They are masters of storytelling, so to say. In the literature, there is this work on narrative transportation, and that says that if you embed arguments in a narrative about characters, a narrative that is emotional, a narrative with events, it is much more easier to convince people. And it's much more persuasive. And also the arguments you use and how you convince people, it is longer lasting. And this is exactly what these far-right parties do. They embed their arguments in narratives. And that is easy because I've just mentioned they have this in-group, out-group story, and that very well lends itself for a narrative structure. And the structure is basically always the same. There is first a romanticized past where everything was still good. Then there is a crisis, a current crisis that is caused by villains, and they pose a huge threat. And then there is the hero who fights back, who will defeat the enemy, and who will restore what seemed lost. To give you one example, Donald Trump despises everything that smells like wokeness or left-wing indoctrination. And for him, the romanticized past is how it was before, where American families were still traditional, where common sense still prevailed, where boys were still boys and girls were still girls. And this was the past that he wishes comes back. But then the villains entered the scene, the left-wing lunatics who basically indoctrinated children. And these enemies, right? The villains that do this, they have to be. They are responsible for the current state of American society, of the current crisis that is going on. America is not what it used to be. But thank God there is the hero, Donald Trump himself, of course, who will restore everything. It's the hero who fights back and who will make America great again. And it is important to realize here that this is, of course, not just an analysis. It is not just an ideology and a substantive message. It is a very emotional narrative. It is filled with negative emotions, anger about the villains, sadness about the current situation, anxiety for what is going on, disgust with the elites, for instance. All these emotions are present, but also positive emotions. Make America great again. There is hope. There is pride in the American people. There is enthusiasm about the new leader. So all these emotions are really, really important. So where does it bring us? On the one hand, one could say that this is all good news from a democratic point of view. In fact, we had all these people who had worries about immigration, about politics, and now we have political leaders who represent their concerns, and that is good for democracy because we had certain worries, and there is a politician that represents that. But from a liberal democratic perspective, I would say that this is the greatest challenge that we face since World War II. State institutions, free media, science, expertise, facts, freedom, and equality, they're all under pressure. So the question is how to deal with that. And there, of course, this new network comes in. And I think what is really important is that we strengthen liberal democratic awareness.